So as Lindsay mentioned, my name is Herman Brown. I'm actually the Chief Information Officer for the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. And I have a firm belief that IT leaders are made, not born. And the reason for that is that IT leadership really comes through experience, knowledge, accountability, and teamwork. It's one thing to get the book knowledge and experience, but it's something totally different in the real world, as you'll notice once you get out into the working class or into the career field. And the way things started off for me is I actually started off in the military with the U.S. Navy. I served 7 years, spent 10 months in the Gulf during Desert Storm. I started out working on Honeywell tape vacuum systems, paper tape, card readers, dot matrix printers. We had these huge, tape vacuum systems, and we had to run these programs that ran off of literally tapes. If you ever seen, the old reel-to-reel music tapes, we had reels not reels like that, but we had media that was on reels like that, and you'd put it into this tape vacuum machine, and you'd have to feed it through, and there were 4 drives. And you use 3 of those drives to actually make a new data set, on that medium. And then you would take that tape and you'd move it from the 4th position to the 1st position, and you'd add the other tapes and to make a new tape. And that's how we actually process data. Well, security at that point was very different than what it is today. We were more concerned about the physical security of the environment, right? Because we didn't have internet when I was on the ship, and this was actually work that I did on board a ship on board the USS Mars at my first duty station in Oakland, California. And so you weren't really worried about the internet, cybersecurity, and you weren't worried too much about personal threat because it was a secure space and only authorized people would get in. I had a security clearance at that point in time, but it wasn't really until I transferred to the U.S. Synclant Fleet Command in Norfolk, Virginia, where my security level was raised to top secret. As I can't talk to what exactly I did, but it was a different environment. The size of the computer rooms back then were huge, and I probably have more computing processing power in my cell phone than what we did back in that time. Gosh, it makes me sound so old and ancient, but it really wasn't that long ago. But at U.S. Synclant Fleet Command, I worked on DataNet 8 systems, which was basically what we would refer to as routers today, and PlexView, which was essentially is Cisco card manager. So if you're familiar with Cisco switches, and they have these blades in them for the different card types, fiber, RJ45s for Ethernet, etc. That's what PlexView was, the pre-Cisco version of that. And then we had these huge tape drum systems where basically the tape vacuums, like I said, those reels, they were stacked on top of one another, and you'd actually lift up 5 or 6 tapes at a time, and you would put them into these huge drums that would actually read the media and so forth. At that point in time, we started becoming a little bit more concerned about, I wouldn't call it cybersecurity, but external threat actors, because this was the time that we were just starting to run wide area networks. So we weren't only running programs that were within our physical building, but we were also connecting to other systems within our campus. So then you have to start worrying about, well, what access does these people have at this other building with, on the base, or does everyone have the appropriate security level to be viewing this information and data, as you kind of start getting concerned with people wanting to sell that information or obtain that information illegally. After my military career, I went to go work in the public sector, and I worked for a company called Star Digital, where there I did I did component level repair on printers, laptops, desktops. I received my MCSE certification, and then I started consulting within the organization. And one of the companies that I was consulting for was the Blessings Corporation. Blessings Corporation was a plastic manufacturing company. They were based in Newport News, Virginia, with plants in Mexico. And they did the packaging for like Pampers, for Tampax, Wonder Bread. And so they had a lot of intellectual property that they were interested in protecting, but not a huge internet presence. But this is when you started really building out server environments. And so I built out my first Windows network with Windows NT server. So like I said, I feel like I'm really dating myself and talking about some of this technology. But, but this is all, I'm setting up, how cybersecurity and how security has just transformed over the years. After that, I went to go work for a company called SAIC, Science Applications International Corporation, where I was in their healthcare consulting division. And in their healthcare consulting division, I visited 264 Kaiser facilities throughout Southern California, as well as approximately 12 to 15 Catholic Healthcare West health organizations. If anyone is familiar with the Bay Area, San Francisco, Northern California, Catholic Health Care consisted of places like O'Connor Hospital in San Jose, Seton and Daly City. So they had a number of independent hospitals that they ran. It was ran by a Catholic healthcare organization, which named CHW. As we started working with them, really this was around 1999, 1998. So we started preparing for Y2K. So the concern was less about necessarily cybersecurity, but it was worried about the programming within these different systems, hardware, routers, servers, all network equipment, because all the physical hardware components were thought to be, or I shouldn't say thought, some of them were actually programmed to only go to a 1999 year date. And so it was unknown, well, what's going to happen when these machines hit 1999 or when it goes to roll over to 2000? Are they still going to work? Are they going to stop functioning? So he did a lot of testing around that. And that was the big concern. So it was less about cybersecurity and more about the physical hardware and protection of the environment, with some concerns about the campus-wide, network. Because still organizations were still very much segmented. I know as part of working for SEIC, I transferred over to one of their subsidiaries called Oasis Healthcare, which then got bought out by a company called Denmark. What Oasis did was we actually did clinical healthcare applications. But at that time, the campus was still very segmented from the rest of the office locations. Example being, we had an office in San Rafael, California, as well as an office in Atlanta and an office in Ottawa, Canada. However, those three offices acted very much independently. We had a dial-up connection between the offices. So, I'm dating myself. That's what I say. I'm struggling in doing this, virtually, because I'm trying to imagine or vision you guys' faces and looking when I talk about dial-up. What some of you are probably saying, what in the world is dial-up? But yeah, it was very very modern technology for the time, but very old technology for today. And so once again, the threat vector was very different than what it is today. After that, I went to work for an ad agency. There it was a combined PC and Mac environment. And really our primary concern was viruses, Trojan horses, and internal users, because our users started becoming a little bit more sophisticated. So they wanted to start, downloading and installing their own applications, doing their own programming. And so what we would refer to today as shadow IT. And so, the approach was, you just needed a good antivirus system, and you needed to make sure that you had a physical, secure location to protect that data and information. And you're a little concerned because you started connecting to the internet and you started seeing the WAN area, wide area networks start connecting to one another and becoming more of a massive or across cross city, cross state, cross the nation, network, but not a huge, concern with cybersecurity and what we would refer to today. After that, I actually left and come to work for the city and county of San Francisco. I initially started off with the Department of Technology, so I was responsible for centralized services that the city provided to the 60 departments across the organization. I was brought on as the IS project director, responsible for the implementation of Office 365. While in that role, I also took on the responsibility of managing the customer service desk, doing enterprise contract negotiations, and a client business client services manager. What that really meant was that I was going out, meeting with these 60 different departments and understanding some of their challenges that they had within their organization and how DT or central IT could actually provide services. That's really when we started getting into kind of the cybersecurity and started thinking about it, not only from just a physical office location, but more from a WAN perspective and looking at what is it that we can do and what should we be doing to be able to protect the entire organization and at least set minimum baselines for protection and security. And then with that, with Office 365 became the introduction of the cloud. And that was all new to the city. It was, there was a lot of people that were apprehensive about, going to the cloud. It's like, oh, well, my data, a quick story is I had a conversation with the department head. So here I am, like I said, the new person, the new kid on the block. I come into this organization. This was actually my second Office 365 migration, but my first Office 365 migration was actually to what was called BPOS, which was the Business Productivity Operations Suite, which was Microsoft's preamble to Office 365 before they rebranded it to Office 365. So I come in and the organization is utilizing Lotus Notes. And there were 9 Lotus Notes server environments across the city. There was a number of different administrators. There was a number of different security practices that was followed by the different managers, supervisors, and organizations that were managing this environment. So here I am to consolidate this and get the city on a single platform of Office 365. So I call up the department head for one of the departments, and I'm having this conversation. So, I introduce myself. I'm Herman Brown, blah, 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 blah. I'd like to come out, meet with you, discuss migrating you to Office 365. What? Oh, no. There's no way we can do that. We cannot move and put our data in the cloud. Everyone has access to it. We can't. Yeah, no. Our data is too sensitive. We can't do that. No, I'm sorry. No. We have nothing to talk about. So it's okay. I'm sorry to hear that. I'll schedule a meeting for us to follow up with you in a couple of months. And so literally the next day I received an email from the same department and saying, hey, we're having an issue. We want to be able to access our Lotus Notes email from outside of the office. Can you help us forward our email to Gmail, to AOL, to whatever the vendor of choice was for the individual people within this office? And I was like, what? Hold on. We can't do that. One, it's against city policy to forward email to a private email address. And secondly, you can't put your data in the cloud because it's too sensitive, is what I was told by the department head just yesterday. So I called the department head up and I said, hey, I have this really strange request that, your team is asking us for assistance to be able to put their data in the cloud. And he was like, well, no, we can't put it in the cloud. We wanted to forward it to Yahoo and to Gmail. And I was like, well, essentially that's the cloud, right? It's someone else's mail system that you're utilizing to be able to access, the corporate mail, the organizational mail. And he's like, well, no, it's different because it's Amazon, it's Yahoo. They're right down the street from us. They have a physical data center. And so that light bulb clicked in my head in that I realized that cloud computing and what some of the people within the organization thought of the cloud was literally that when you said going to Office 365 and your email was going to be in the cloud, as they literally thought it was in a cloud somewhere and that anyone would have access to this data. And that was the furthest from the truth. And so I had to then go back and educate, you know, the organization on what it meant for cloud computing, right? And with that, then we started seeing some progress and people adopting, you know, cloud computing. And we put a lot of emphasis on, you know, improved security on cloud computing because this was the business that these organizations were in particularly Microsoft in this example. But as time progressed and we became more mature as an organization and became more knowledgeable as an organization and individuals, we also began to understand that we could not 100% rely on the service provider to provide all of the necessary security to meet the security requirements that we may have. Thinking about the city and county of San Francisco, it said it's basically 60 different lines of businesses that range anywhere from the film commission, who's responsible for coordinating with Hollywood on movie shoots and closing down streets and getting permits to be able to do that work. Not a lot of sensitive information around there, right? There's not a lot to gain from, okay, well, Tom Cruise is going to be in town shooting Mission Impossible 7, you know, at Fisherman's Wharf. I mean, when they're shooting at Fisherman's Wharf, any given time, there's people down there at Fisherman's Wharf and they're going to call their buddies and say, hey, you know, guess what's happening down here? There's a movie shoot coming on, you know, you should come down and check it out. You know, maybe we can be extras. You know, so not a lot of sensitive information. Then you have the airport, you know, at SFO where, you know, there's a little bit more, you know, sensitivity around that and flight schedules and paths and FAA requirements. But then you have places such as law enforcement, such as SFPD, the District Attorney's Office, Adult Probation, Public Defender's Office, where we're dealing with criminal history and information. And then you have like the Tax Assessor's Office that's dealing with people's Social Security numbers, tax information. And then we have the Department of Public Health, which is dealing with medical information, PHI, PII, you know, types of data. So there's not a single solution that meets all of those different standards and needs. And one of the things that you try to do is figure out, well, what is that baseline of service that we need to provide to meet the minimum, you know, security requirements, because we can't have the film commission working at a level in which the police department may need to work at, or our law enforcement agencies may need to work at, or Department of Public Health with PHI, PII, you know, types of data. But still very, very young, very early, very much into the beginning of the understanding of the dynamics there. Then we started talking about and looking at, well, the integration between these different systems being in the cloud and being on-prem. There's a certain level, Office 365, relying on our internal Active Directory. And so how do we synchronize our Active Directory with the cloud service provider so we can provide single sign-on, same sign-on, you know, types of solutions? Is our environment actually secure and protected? What ports do we open up to allow? So a lot of engineering, a lot of thought process, a lot of changes in city policy and process had to change with the introduction of cloud computing. Then I come over, you know, after 4 years with Central IT, I come over to the DA's office where I had migrated them to Office 365. So I had some familiarity with what the DA's office did, but a very novice, you know, thought process, and that, oh, well, you know what? They prosecute people. They're just here to put people behind bars. Well, that's not true. I mean, it is and it isn't, right? The DA's office offers a number of other services, such as we have our victim services unit that provides medical services, child care services, a lot of community outreach programs, restitution for victims of crime. Example being, if your front door is kicked in a home invasion and you don't have the money to replace that door, get that door fixed, we have services that we can set you up with and assist you with to be able to help pay to have that door fixed. We deal with different types of crimes, ranging from misdemeanors to domestic violence to child assault, sexual assault cases. those different data sets, data classification as we refer to it as, requires a different level of security. You cannot handle a child assault, sexual assault case and information because of the nature of the crime and because of the age of the victim, the same as you do a misdemeanor with someone jaywalking, as an example. So then we also started looking at, well, how do we classify this different data? What are the requirements around managing this data type? How do we provide that additional level of security to be able to protect that? And when I came to the DA's office, I started learning and really getting into the weeds of what the organization does and what we need to do. And I was introduced into a whole nother level of security, which is CJIS, the Criminal Justice Information System or information. And I started thinking, well, think of myself as a criminal, right? What would I need to do, or what would I try to do if I knew that the DA's office was prosecuting, me? And I was like, well, I may not have the technical skills necessary to infiltrate that environment, but I may have the financial resources to be able to hire someone who does have those skills, and or to bribe someone who may work in the DA's office who may have access to that information and data. And because what I'm trying to do as a criminal is throw reasonable doubt into a jury's mind so that I can get off. But that has a downstream effect, and thinking about, well, how does that impact, one, the integrity of the office, two, any other cases that we may have going on at that particular time and at the time of which the breach may have occurred. And we may now have people that have been incarcerated that are thinking, well, hey, you know what? My case was going on at the time that they had the breach. How do I know that my data wasn't, tampered with and breached? So now we have a group of people that are also filing for appeals, and we have to now go back and retry these cases and so forth. So that's the way that my mind thinks when I think about security, right? So me coming in, taking a leadership role, is I sat down with our executive team and said, hey, here's the concerns that I have. Here's what I feel we should be thinking about, and here's the reasons why. And I gave them that exact, story. It was an example. I said, so what I'm going to do in my first 90 days in this role, or 100 days in this role, is I'm going to do a security assessment. And I'm going to look at where we are today and where I think we should be. And while I'm doing that, I'm looking at our systems, our process, and our vendors, right, to evaluate the security risk. And when I come back, is I'm going to make a recommendation. I said, and it's only a recommendation. As the CIO, as I'm responsible for technology, and because this is a smaller organization, I'm also wearing the hat of the CISO. Unfortunately, my previous year's experience, and that's why I say, IT leaders are made, not born, is because it's only through this experience that I've gotten to the place where I am today, and through that knowledge and experience that I'm able to have this conversation and think about it from a holistic point of view. And so after that 100 days, I came back to the executive team and says, okay, here's my findings. And I've quantified everything into a high, medium, or low risk. And my recommendation as the IT, and as a CISO, putting on my CISO hat, is we want to mitigate risk down to the lowest common denominator. And so we want to go with everything needs to be low. However, you can't necessarily make everything low because you have to take into consideration the business. I said, so now it's a matter of what is an acceptable risk factor for the business, right? And that's what this organization, right, the executive team, we have to come up with. What is our acceptable level of risk? Because for me to say that, well, no one can work remote, and that way we don't have to worry about remote access, can give us a low, remote threat factor. However, is it really reasonable to say that no one can work remote? And so how do we mitigate that, or how do we minimize that, or what is the acceptable risk? So maybe it's not everyone, but we're going to be very strategic about who works remote. And so we're only going to give 12% of our workforce remote access because they need it, either because they're a supervisor, their IT, or whatever the case may be, right? And so what I was doing is setting up the organization to understand that, one, security is not a IT issue. It is an organizational issue, and the organization has to take responsibility for the IT security. Because once again, as the CISO, as I'm going to say, everything needs to be low. But if it compromises the business or prevents the business, stifles the business from being able to perform their service, then staff are only going to look for means to work around that security measure, which then is defeating the purpose of putting in that security, measure. And so that's the way that I operate today within, the DA's office and the environment. So we go through a number of different things and understanding to set up security. So I don't know if you guys can hear me, or you have the ability to respond to questions or whatnot. So I'll ask, and if you can respond, great. If not, then I'll throw out some of the things, some of the responses that I would expect to have heard. First of all, what is a threat actor? Do you know what threat actors are? Have you covered threat actors? And what are some of those types of threat actors? And I'd say, yeah, please put it in the chat box for me. I'll give you a couple of seconds to type that in. Because when you're thinking about cybersecurity, you have to think about, well, what are not only the data that I'm protecting, but who am I protecting the data from? All right. I see APT, hackers. Yeah, those are a couple of threat actors. But a more simplified way, or another way of actually putting it, is internal, right? Is your staff, your employees. Insider threat. Ashley, yeah, perfect. That's what I was looking for. Is insider threat. And there's two types of insider threats. There are insider threats, the malicious time, where you have maybe a disgruntled employee. And then there are employees that are either looking for a workaround or they're just making honest mistakes, right? Another threat actor is state, government-sponsored threat actors, like what we've seen with most recently SolarWinds. That was a government-sponsored, threat. There's the standard hackers, but there's hackers come into also different categories. You have hackers that are hacking to cause disruption in service. You get those denial of service attacks. There's hackers that are just for fun. Oh, let me see. Like the 13-year-old kid that took down the Eastern Seaboard. With his PlayStation network. Just goofing off and not really understanding or realizing what he did, but he just did that for fun. And then hacktivists. That's the other one I was looking for. And yes, hacktivists, those are ones, for political gain, that are trying to make a statement because they don't like, you're not, your organization is not an organic organization, or you're doing, they feel that you're doing testing on animals, or it's political, as we've seen, especially here in the last, 6 years with the election campaigns, concerns around that. But in going through these threat actors, I also kind of spoke to, the types of threats and also the reasons, right? Financial gain, disgruntled employee, political gain, accidental, and just for fun. So so I talked about how I address that security, but I also break that down into buckets, right? So there's the low, medium, high, from looking at the risk level, but then there's also how do you manage your cybersecurity environment, and which is through governance, people, and procurement and services. So when we talk about governance, we're talking about policies, putting policies in place to help guide staff. And when I refer to staff, I'm referring to end users, people within the organization. Here in the DA's office, we don't call our end users, we refer to them as staff. So just to clarify that terminology there for anyone who may be wondering what I'm referring to when I say staff. But it's through policies, right? It's setting policies and guidelines so that staff understand what is acceptable and what is not acceptable behavior in the network. For instance, the sharing of passwords. When we bring on new staff, they go through orientation. One of the things that I tell them in orientation, first and foremost, is one of my pet peeves and number one security item is we do not share passwords with anyone, not even with IT, right? As I tell them, IT, we don't need your passwords. We're never going to ask you for your password. We may ask you to log in for us if there is an issue that you're having with your workstation specific to that workstation, but we're not going to say, hey, can you give me your password so that I can log? No, we're admins, right? So my desktop support team, they have admin access, so we can use our admin login credentials to be able to do work, install programs, applications, whatever. We can use those admin credentials to be able to do testing in a lot of cases. But in those rare occasions when we need your actual login ID and password to troubleshoot something that's specific to your profile, we're going to ask you to log in for us, right? We're going to, and even in this remote session, is we do a remote screen share. Okay, log in, give us control. You can see everything that we're doing because we're trying to eliminate, one, the sharing of passwords and people feeling that it's okay. There's all kinds of phishing schemes, catfishing schemes where, people are trying to get, your login ID and password. And that is probably the number one means of being able to, of compromising someone. And it requires the least amount of work, right? It requires a phone call or an email to someone and saying, hey, yeah, I'm with, especially if you're in a large organization where your staff may not know the IT staff, and to be able to call up and say, hey, I'm John, with IT, and hey, we're running into a problem here that we're seeing on your machine, and so I need your login ID and password because your account keeps coming up with this error, this issue, and we're trying to troubleshoot it. So can you give me your login ID and password, please? And and if you don't have a proper governance in place, someone would easily say, okay, well, yeah, John, yeah, sure. I want to be helpful. I want to help you out. Yeah, here's my login ID and password. And now you've just given someone that you don't even know your login ID and password. And, obviously through phishing, emails, that's another means of being able to do that. Right. So you want to make sure that you have policies that are covering acceptable use. Cybersecurity policies specifically, general policies and use, but specific cybersecurity policies, training and awareness. So we do annual training for all of our staff on cybersecurity. Training is designed specifically to the person's role and responsibility within the organization. An example is an attorney will go through cybersecurity training on things that are specific to being an attorney, such as client attorney confidentiality, whereas finance is going through training that is specific to PCI, credit card information. IT actually has a larger training scale because we have to kind of cover all those gamuts of PCI, PII, PHI, etc. We have an alternative courts, mental health, so they go through the PHI and health, HIPAA related training for cybersecurity and how to manage that. So to have a very customized training program is an absolute, in my opinion. Data classification, is that you need to classify your data, right? Not all data is created equal. There's public data, especially within the DA's office. We have public information that we post on our website as an example. And then as I talked about, the misdemeanor, case information is less sensitive than a juvenile case information. Once again, the mental health, we start talking about the PHI information or the HIPAA information, that has a different level of classification and requirements. And then what are our cybersecurity requirements? What are the things that we're going to do to be able to help protect the office from attack, whether that's an insider attack or whether that's an external attack? So there's obviously the things such as your firewalls to protect the north-south traffic. And then there's things that are solutions that you can put in place that actually protect east-west. And when we talk about east-west, we're talking lateral movement. That means someone getting into your network and accessing one machine, but then being able to jump to your servers or to another workstation, but going laterally across your environment to be able to do damage and or to find sensitive information, and nowadays ransomware. And then people, being the next category. And so every year we have an all hands, well, we do an all hands twice a year, but at least once a year I get up and I present on cybersecurity to our organization. And one of the first questions I ask is, everyone as part of the security team, please raise your hand. And I pause for a few seconds and I look around the audience. And my expectation is that everyone in the audience has their hand raised, because everyone is responsible for cybersecurity and the security of the organization, whether that's physical security or whether that's, virtual or logical security. When you say physical security, we're talking about tailgating, right? Is we want to make sure that people are not, just allowing others to walk in behind them. You need to recognize and make sure that that person belongs, in the spaces that are restricted spaces. If you don't know them, feel comfortable in challenging them, and not challenging them in getting physical, but hey, who are you? What organization are you with? In most cases, that is enough to thwart, a physical breach into your environment. With that, we also get into, right, the logical, aspects of it, right, and the cybersecurity training and wanting to train or needing to train the staff in that area. So everyone should have their hands, raised. Yes, I'm part of the cybersecurity team, right? And then we do cybersecurity roundtables. Every so often I'll hold a cybersecurity roundtable. I'll have managers, line staff, executives come and sit down with me, and we'll talk about, hey, what is it that we're doing to protect the environment? Why are we rolling out services? One of the things that we have the ability to do in our environment is I can actually disable USB drives, because we don't want staff being able to copy case data and onto a thumb drive and then be able to give that to someone else that maybe is unauthorized to have that data material. So we have the ability to do that. So we sit down and we talk about, well, why are we implementing these types of things, so that the organization understands why these are being done, but also for me to be able to get feedback. Because as I said earlier, one of the things that when you're implementing cybersecurity is you don't want to stifle or cripple the organization from being able to do its core mission and job. So you have to find that right balance. And the only way you can find that right balance is having the conversations. Because once again, if you are too strict in your policies, people are only going to look for, good people within your organization are going to look for ways to get around those policies, processes, and procedures. Training and seminars, that kind of goes in with the roundtable, but the training and seminars is really more so for the IT staff, as I try to get my IT staff involved with cybersecurity training seminars to help educate them so that they understand, the pros and cons to different tools and solutions, thinking about, the cloud service providers, our vendors, and who we're working with, and how do we help manage, that environment, those connections into those environments. As I mentioned earlier, new employee orientation, right? It's very important to set that standard at the onset of bringing in new staff, and that, hey, this is how we do things within this office, right? I don't care. You may come from another city department and they may do things differently, but I can't speak to their practices. I can't speak to, the organizational data. I can't speak to their risk level or risk acceptance. But for here, this is what our risk acceptance is. And these are our practices, our policies, procedures in which we abide by within this organization. And you're expected to abide by these, right? And you actually have to sign off on these policies that you understand, have read them, and will follow them. And by not abiding by these, you're subject to termination, right? So, so we try to set that standard, make sure that everyone understands that, make sure that everyone is on the same page. Once again, annual user training through our cybersecurity training program. It's mandatory, required that you have to complete that annual cybersecurity training. So even if, let's say that you start with my organization today, You'll go through orientation. There'll be a 20-minute session then which I will present on cybersecurity and IT, which isn't a lot of time, to be honest, but it's to just give you the basis for here are the top 3-5 things that you absolutely cannot do from a cybersecurity standpoint in this office. And to point you in the direction of like, here's where you go for the full cybersecurity training. Here's where you go to actually see and review all the other policies. And here's the document that you're going to sign off on saying that you have been told about these policies. You are going to read these policies and you're going to adhere to these policies, right? And you want that message to be consistent throughout the organization and throughout the orientation process. We also do monthly user awareness training. So if I'm on a number of different news feeds. And so if I get information from the FBI, as an example, that says, oh, there is a threat from this particular application, and this is what that threat looks like. I will send out a shorter version of that to the staff in layman's terms so that they understand that, hey, there's a recent threat that we have to be concerned with. And or just, hey, even something as simple as, I'm sure some of you have probably received the phone calls about, hey, this is the IRS and your social security number has been breached and you're at risk of having your social security number disabled. Please call this number, right? And you call the number and you get them on the phone and they're like, oh yeah, you owe, $20,000 in taxes and so forth. And if you don't pay this money, then we're going to shut off your social security number, right? Or the police are going to come after you, right? And so, so I'll send out notifications about those types of things, events to staff to make them aware that these things are happening. Also, so that they can pass it along to our customers, like I said, which are the victims of crimes. We do targeted phishing simulations regularly to staff, just so that staff can recognize what a phishing email looks like. And that's part of the training that we go over and things for them to look at in those phishing attempts. It's always interesting to see the reports that come out with those phishing records, because it's usually the same few people that click on the links, and we get notified, and the first time that they click on the link, we get notified and they just redo that phishing training. The second time they click on the link after having redone the phishing training, then we bring them in for kind of a in-person training, so to speak. And then the third time that they do that, then I actually call them up and say, hey, we really need to talk. What is it that you're not understanding and identifying a phishing email, right? And so we try to help them out. And if it happens a fourth time, we bring in their supervisor, right? And have their supervisor sit down with, and the three of us sit down and we have a conversation about, hey, we really need to understand what's going on, because you've been through training, right? Orientation, annual training, one-on-one training, a personal conversation, and now we have to bring your supervisor and you're still making the same mistakes. So how can we help you? And it's all about, as I tell people, we're not trying to embarrass anyone. We don't want to belittle anyone, as we truly want to understand why you're not understanding a phishing email, so that we can help you, because it is, once again, it's everyone's responsibility to protect the environment, and we're only as strong as the weakest link. So if we have someone who is continuing to make these types of mistake, we need to understand why, so that we can correct that and provide a better protected environment. And then last but not least is procurement and services. So we've come up with standard contracting language for when we're working with our cloud service providers, because not all cloud solutions are created equally. Risk assessments and remediation plans. What happens if there is a breach? What is the process that we're going to go through to mitigate that risk, to communicate that risk, and to repair that risk? 24/7, 365-day monitoring. We have tools, systems in place that will alert us to things that are anomalies, as I like to refer to them, in the environment. We have AI learning that takes into account people's behavior. So if someone's behavior changes drastically, all of a sudden, we're alerted. We have systems that also do what we call detect, mitigate, and inform. And what that means is that it detects that there's an issue, right? The system automatically takes a mitigation or remediation step to be able to prevent that threat from going any further than what it already has, and then it notifies someone, so that someone can take a human eye and look at it and say, okay, this is a legitimate threat. We stopped it at this point, so this is what has been breached, if anything, and then we can start the remediation process of notifying the appropriate people, whether that's just internally, whether that's our centralized IT, whether that's authorities such as FBI or one of our consulting insurance carriers, etc. Vulnerability management, right, is understanding we talked today about, or when I say today, I mean in general, the threat and whether or not it's a matter of not if you've been breached, but when you're going to be breached. And I hate to use that term because it's, as I was in an event last week and I was speaking with some colleagues, CIO, CISO level. And I told them that I think at this, one of the things that cybersecurity people have done, I think in the past couple of years, is really try to strike fear into the executives about, hey, we really need to spend this money and beefing up our cybersecurity, because if we don't, we're definitely going to get hacked, right? But we're seeing that no matter, one, there's no silver bullet. Two, no matter how much money you invest into your cybersecurity or security program, you cannot stop someone who is dead set on breaching your environment, right? There's only so much that you can do, short of just disconnecting from the internet altogether, right? And not having any employees, which therefore means you don't have a business. So you have to find that right balance, and you're having the conversations with your peers and executive levels about, investment in cybersecurity, and ensuring that they understand that, yeah, there's no silver bullet that's going to prevent a cyber attack. There's no one solution that covers all the different, areas, from the cloud services to your internal services, firewalls, email, etc. So you have to antivirus, Trojans, ransomware. So you have to find different solutions that performs in those different areas. And it may be that one solution can provide services that covers, other areas, but its primary focus is really, this is what it's best at. And there may be another tool that it's better at doing one of those other areas, that first tool. And you may need to invest in that to provide that level of security. All depends on your environment. And I said, no two environments are the same. So that's something that you as an organization have to make a decision on. But the vulnerability management is determining what is that vulnerability level and what is an acceptable risk of downtime and to get us back online should we have a catastrophic type of breach, such as a ransomware, where our entire organization is now crippled because of the ransom, and we're not going to pay the ransom, or we paid the ransom and they still didn't, provide us the keys to be able to decrypt that encrypted information that they're holding ransom from us. Logging and auditing, as we try to log and audit, people's activities so that we can have a means of being able to go back. So we know that if someone is logging in on multiple machines, whether they're physically in this building or in one of our other buildings, or they're at home, we know it's not possible that they can be in two places at once, right? So that's going to trip an alarm. That's going to notify us, and that's going to prompt me in making a phone call. And why are you sharing your passwords? And we're going to reset their passwords, right? First and foremost. And then identity access management, right, is being able to manage the identities of our staff, knowing who they are, where they are, and multi-factor authentication, right, to ensure that we have the appropriate people logging into our systems and accessing our data. So what my experience has taught me, right, and this is the takeaway for this group, is security is everyone's responsibility. I think I've said that a few times. Leave nothing to chance. When thinking of security, you need to consider all aspects, physical and logical security. find balance in what is acceptable to the organization, what's your accepted risk level. Too tight of a security, once again, staff are going to look for ways around security. You can't cripple the business. You have to find that sweet spot. There's no magic bullet. It's not a matter of if, but a matter of when you may be breached. I started to say earlier, right, with that, I said it's a disservice is that because of that terminology also, you have to be careful, right? You don't want to scare your executive team or your organization into that, oh, you have to invest all this money, we have to do all this money to protect the environment, and then turn around and say, well, no matter how much money we invest, we're still going to get breached, right? And so you're starting to give yourself a disservice because you're talking at both ends of the microphone, whatever the analogy is. And so you have to be careful. We have to be careful as IT professionals, as cybersecurity professionals, in having these conversations and making sure that we're clear in what we mean by the investment into the technology and the risk that is posed to us today. Because once again, anyone who has enough desire and resources to get into your environment will get into your environment, whether that's through physical access or whether that's through a logical access. There's just not enough security to be able to prevent that unless you have, maybe NORAD, And then last but not least, aim to protect, detect, mitigate, and respond, right? That's really the best that you can do, right? Is you provide the most amount of protection that you can to the environment that's acceptable between your budget and the executive staff. You want to be able to quickly detect when there's an anomaly, where there's something that's happening on your environment that's not should be happening, or someone is in there that should not be in there. You want to mitigate that as quickly as possible to cause the least amount of damage. And then you want to appropriately respond to that.